Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking the ultimate toolkit for turning really complex ideas into tangible reality. We're going to demystify project management and totally transform it from what a lot of people see as just a dry administrative chore into a dynamic, strategic engine that can absolutely supercharge your daily work. Whether you're leading a massive corporate initiative right now or, just trying to organize a local community event, the frameworks we're going to cover today will give you absolute clarity and control.
Okay, let's dive into this. Ever wonder why some projects cross the finish line flawlessly, while others just completely descend into chaos? You know the ones, missing deadlines, burning through budgets, entirely burning out the team. Well, it really isn't just about bad luck or a lack of talent. Almost always, it comes down to one fundamental variable: how well that project is actually managed behind the scenes.
So let's establish our foundation. Project management is formally defined as the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to a project to ensure its successful completion. Now, it's absolutely crucial to remember that a project isn't just your standard day-to-day operational work. It's a temporary endeavor. That means it has a specific starting point, a finite timeline, and a limited set of resources, all aimed at achieving one unique singular objective. And the second that objective is met, the project is over. And the way modern professionals think about these temporary endeavors, it's fundamentally shifting. The recently released 8th edition of the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which is widely known as the PMBOK Guide, states this perfectly. All projects are investments. I love that because it profoundly elevates the entire discipline. You aren't just an administrator checking off boxes on some to-do list. No, you are actively managing a strategic investment designed to deliver real, measurable value to an organization. Good project management relies on clear scopes and expectations, which is why we are establishing our baseline right now. Here's our agenda. First, decoding project management. Second, the 5 essential phases. Third, Agile versus Waterfall. And fourth, mastering stakeholder management.
Section 1. Decoding project management and its historical context.
To really master these tools, we need to appreciate the sheer complexity of managing human work. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it shows we have been refining these organizational tools for over a century. The origins of formal project management actually trace all the way back to the 1890s with Karol Adamiecki's harmonogram, which eventually paved the way for Henry Gantt's famous visual tracking charts in the 1910s. Fast forward to the 1950s, and you have these complex critical path methods and PERT tools being created just to manage massive engineering feats. And that evolution, it continues right up to the 2025 release of the PMBOK's 8th edition. We've quite literally spent decades trying to perfect how humans get complex things done efficiently.
And getting things done today requires juggling a staggering number of moving parts. Modern project managers actually have to balance 10 core knowledge areas simultaneously just to keep a project from derailing. 10. We're talking about managing the scope, the schedule, the costs, the quality of the deliverables, the resources, team communications, risks, procurements, stakeholder engagement, and project integration. It's like a giant puzzle. Drop the ball on just one of these pieces, like, say, failing to identify a major risk or completely ignoring a cost overrun, and your entire project can collapse.
Section 2. The 5 essential phases of the project lifecycle.
Think of this as the chronological spine of our explainer. It represents the actual life cycle that every single well-managed project goes through, from the initial spark of an idea right down to the final handshake. The PMBOK outlines 5 basic process groups. First up is initiation. This is where you define the project's feasibility and get official authorization, usually through a project charter. Second is planning, where you meticulously outline tasks, timelines, and budgets. Third is executing. This is where the actual work gets done. Fourth is monitoring and controlling, where you're constantly checking your real-world progress against your original plan. And finally, fifth is closing, where you formally hand over the final deliverables, release your resources, and actually document what you learned.
Now, during that absolutely crucial planning phase, you've got to speak the language of the discipline. Let's do a rapid-fire vocabulary session. A Gantt chart is your visual project timeline. It shows your tasks over time. Your baseline is the officially approved starting point for your scope, schedule, and budget. It's what you measure success against. Deliverables are the tangible final products you actually have to produce. Dependencies are tasks that absolutely rely on the completion of others before they can even begin. And finally, scope creep, which is honestly the ultimate project killer, is the unmanaged gradual expansion of tasks that completely blows up your timeline and your budget. Knowing these terms naturally arms you to spot bottlenecks early on.
Right, so here is a really vital distinction regarding the middle of the project lifecycle. Phases 3 and 4.
executing and monitoring and controlling happen at the exact same time. You don't just build the product blindly and check it at the end. No way. You have to execute the work while constantly looking at your project dashboard to mitigate risks, adapt resources, and ensure quality. Think of it exactly like driving a car. You're pressing the gas to execute, but you are constantly checking the GPS in your mirrors to control the journey and make sure you haven't veered off your baseline.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 3, Agile versus Waterfall.
So, once you understand the phases of a project, you have to make a strategic choice about exactly how you're going to navigate them. These are the two heavyweights of project management methodologies, and they represent completely contrasting philosophies. On one side, we have Waterfall. It is highly linear, it's sequential, and it relies on strict upfront planning where you complete one fixed phase entirely before moving to the next. On the other side, we have Agile. Agile is iterative and highly adaptable. It breaks work down into short cycles called sprints, and it relies heavily on continuous customer feedback to evolve the product. It's essentially a battle of fixed predictability versus rapid flexibility.
So how do you actually make the choice between the two? Well, if you're managing predictable recurring processes like physical construction or traditional manufacturing, Waterfall excels. Because logically, you have to pour the foundation before you can build the roof, right? But beware, the big risk here is that a single missed deadline early on causes a massive cascading delay across all subsequent phases. Conversely, if you're in software development or marketing where you really need rapid response to changing markets, Agile is phenomenal. However, the risk with Agile is that technical dependencies and the critical path to the final product can be much harder to define and control. Ultimately, you've got to select your approach based on the complexity of your work and your need for speed.
Section 4, Mastering Stakeholder Management, which brings us to the human element.
Okay, now we look at the single most volatile variable that can make or break even your perfectly planned methodology: people. First, we need to define who exactly we're talking about. Stakeholders are any internal or external individuals and groups directly or indirectly impacted by a project. This could be your CEO, your end users, or a completely different team relying on your output. They possess varying levels of power, entirely different objectives, and diverse attitudes. Their early involvement and their continuous support, they aren't just nice to have. They are absolute requirements for success.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer detail required when you're dealing with stakeholders. Managing people requires rigorous analysis, deliberate questioning, and documentation. You can't just rely on guesswork. You actually have to document their motivations, their current perception of your work, who influences them, and even their preferred communication styles.
To actually make sense of all that analysis, professionals use a stakeholder matrix. This maps a person's influence against their interest level, and it provides immediate, actionable value on how to prioritize your engagement time. If someone has low influence and low interest, simply monitor them. If they have high interest but low influence, just keep them informed. If they have high influence but low interest, keep them satisfied so they don't use their power to block you. But what about those stakeholders with high influence and high interest? You must manage them closely, for sure. They are the ultimate champions or destroyers of your project.
Once you've mapped them out, you have to engage them effectively. First things first, define and protect your scope firmly so they know exactly what the boundaries are. Set clear, realistic expectations early on. Be incredibly proactive and completely transparent about risks. Believe me, stakeholders hate bad surprises more than anything else. But most importantly, clearly define the overarching purpose and the true value of the work. When you define the deeper why behind a project, you can literally turn your harshest critics into your most powerful advocates. And finally, and perhaps most crucially, you have got to establish a conflict resolution framework up front. You absolutely need that framework because, let's be real, conflict and change are completely inevitable. Even with perfect Gantt charts and flawless Agile sprints, humans are going to clash. Having a pre-agreed framework to handle conflict is the true mark of a professional. Whether you decide to use the Thomas Kilmann model to navigate interpersonal disagreements, or you use the 80KAR model to guide your team through organizational change, you simply must have a system in place to protect your project when the waters get choppy.
So, the crucial point is this: project management is not just academic theory. It is a highly practical, immensely powerful toolkit meant to be used every single day. Take a look at your current workload right now. Think about the bottlenecks you are facing this very week. Which of your projects desperately needs a methodology pivot, or which one requires an immediate stakeholder intervention today? Take these frameworks, apply them to your daily grind, and watch your chaos turn into coordinated success. Thanks for learning with us today on The Explainer.